Everybody, it's Ted Bogert. Welcome back to the TED Show. This is our special series, one of my favorite. Heroes Always Welcome, where we celebrate our heroes, our veterans, first responders. Lots of people can fall into that category, but we primarily focus on veterans. And the whole goal of the show is for us to talk to a vet who has transitioned out of military service into the crazy, cruel world of civilian life and corporate life. And for that person to share what the journey was like, because we know a lot of you struggle with that and continue to struggle with that out there. So I have my co-host with the most, Justin King, and I have our special guest, Bryan Rubio, and he's going to share his journey. Welcome, gentlemen. How you doing today?
Good.
Good. See, that wasn't so painful. Good. Very good. It's Monday. And I know we're going to play this on a different day, but boy, it's Monday all morning. So if you're having a Monday or you had a Monday, you're going to be able to relate. But this truly is one of my favorite times to spend talking about veterans and heroes. And so before we dive into it and get to know Bryan, Justin, why don't you tell them a little bit about you?
I'm sure. Yeah, I'm an Army veteran. I was spent a few years in Afghanistan. I left that when my wife told me I wasn't allowed to go overseas anymore. Came back home, did the next best thing, got into to law enforcement for about 5 years, and left that in 2020. And now I'm in real estate as a realtor.
Amazing. Thank you. And thank you for your service.
Thank you.
Bryan, tell us about you. So I know Bryan from Military Advisory Council, which is a relatively new committee council. It's actually Military Advisory. Yeah, right. Military Advisory Council. MAC at the Orlando Regional Realtor Association, which is relatively new. And so Bryan and I met there. He's the current chair, and I am excited for you to be on here, Bryan. So tell them a little bit about your service and what that experience was like, and how you did once you got out.
Well, so I was in the Marine Corps. I was in from 2005 to 2009. I didn't do Afghanistan. Actually, I just missed Afghanistan by a few months. I deployed to Iraq in 07 and 08. And then in 09, my unit was slated to go to Afghanistan. And that's when I ended up getting out. So I avoided that third deployment. And when I got out, I was stationed Camp Lejeune. That was the other part. I was stationed in Camp Lejeune. So I'm originally from Jersey. I kind of made my way, all the way down south. And in Camp Lejeune, that life was not the best. There was really nothing in Camp Lejeune, Jacksonville, North Carolina. But nonetheless, I got out. And I was actually somewhat lucky that I came across this gentleman who used to work at a VA regional disability rating office. And he basically brought me and a few other guys into his office and kind of told us, like, listen, I don't care what you do, just make sure you do X, Y, and Z. And we sat there like, okay, we'll do whatever you tell us to. And sure enough, he told us to make sure we get our records together, make copies, and submit the disability claims getting out. And so we listened, thankfully. That was actually one of the biggest blessings I think we had, because aside from him, no one else told us anything. And I'm sure Army and everyone else, like, you have SEPs and TAPS class, which is basically like a class designed to like, hey, this is what you're going to do once you get out, and this is what to expect. And, this is the things that you should be doing. But it's kind of really basic and generic. They don't really go over much. And so aside from those two things, the guy who helped me and then the class, there was nothing else. I knew nothing. I wasn't prepared, if you would. I ended up applying for the Secret Service. I took the test. I actually passed it. I was in their process, but they ended up dropping me because let's just say I wasn't, a total angel in the Marine Corps. So that didn't allow me to go into Secret Service. And most of my buddies did private contracting getting out, and I tried to as well, and I was blocked out because I couldn't get my security clearance, again because of a few things that happened during the Marine Corps. So I was limited. I couldn't do law enforcement. I couldn't do anything related to any of that, law enforcement or even firefighters. It's just background thing wouldn't worked out for me. But anyways, when I got out, I was supposed to go work for I think it was Wackenhut, G4S Wackenhut. It was like a security company, and they were going to send me somewhere to guard basically like silos or something like that. And my entire getting out was like on that. Like everything was riding on that one job. And so I ended up getting out. I got married the same year that I got out, and we moved to Orlando. Ted, I kind of told you the story, but I had nothing. I had 2 vehicles and a U-Haul truck, and we had no jobs lined up. We had nowhere to go. We didn't sign a lease prior to me getting out, and it was just like, all right, we'll figure this out, literally. So we drove down to Orlando, and thankfully that same day we ended up getting an apartment on Cimarron Boulevard, and yeah, that's kind of like how we ended up down here. And I kept following up with that job, the security job, and unfortunately they never called me back. So I had to, kind of give up on that. A few months passed by, and I was just, feeling down because everything was riding on this. I thought this is, a slam dunk, and it wasn't. And so I found myself kind of lost. And this is the part that I'm sure a lot of guys can relate, Justin. I'm sure, you probably went through this, this stage as well. You're lost in the sauce, right? And in the military, you're told where to be, what you have to do. Everything is laid out for you. It's a lot of hurry up and wait, scenarios, but nonetheless, like they're telling you where to be, whether it's PT at 4 o'clock in the morning or whatever. And when you get out, you have nothing. You have no one. Like you're literally like, all right, what do I do? You're waiting the entire 4 years, especially when I was in Iraq the second time. All I could think about was getting out. That's all I wanted to do is get out. And, I thought the life was going to be like this amazing thing, like rainbows and unicorns. And, like just I get to do what I want, sleep in. And when I got out, it wasn't any of that. It was just kind of like a quiet room in the dark kind of thing. Like, what do I do? My wife ended up getting a job. And she was an admin person. And I couldn't. I applied everywhere. I applied to all the big companies who say, "Oh, I'm military friendly." Home Depot, Lowe's, you name it. I applied to everything, even a few jobs for the state, and no one even gave me an interview. So it's just it kind of like it kept beating me down. 6 months out, getting out, I was just honestly, I think I was depressed to a certain extent. I was depressed. I didn't know what to do. So my backup plan was getting my education. So that gentleman that I talked to on the way out of the Marine Corps told me, like, listen, apply for the GI Bill. Obviously, you're eligible for it, and go get a degree, as you work, or, whatever, just get a degree as well. And I ended up applying at Seminole State. They had the direct connect to UCF. And so right about 6-7 months after I had gotten out is when I started my first semester at Seminole State. So it kind of kept me busy, but it still didn't take away the fact that I had no, actual income aside from the BH that you get from school, which is, not much. My disability rating hadn't come in yet because it got delayed. Long story in that, but so I was really beat down. It was one of those like depressing, really bad places. When I look back at it, it was probably one of my worst times. I was happy that I was getting out, but then it's like I got out and it's like I'm not happy at all. This is, the opposite. And I had a few guys tell me on the way out, like higher ups, like I had a first sergeant. He ended up telling me, listen, a lot of guys get out and 6, 7, 8 months later, they come right back in. And, that just echoed in my head. And I'm like, I'm not going to be those guys. Like, I'm not like, there's nothing for me to stay in. Like I did 4 years, 2 deployments. I was infantry, by the way. That's it. Like my body is done mentally. I'm tapped out.
Yeah.
And so, so I eventually got a job with the driver license office, and they took a chance on me. Thankfully it took a chance on me. It wasn't the best paid job, but it did, how to say it, I think it got me prepared for where I am now, especially my manager then. She ended up passing away from cancer a few years ago, but she was, I would say, my first mentor getting out. And here's the other part, with the mentor thing. A lot of guys getting out should have mentors. even before you get out, like they should tap into, whatever network and get a mentor, to kind of help them, get coached on the way out, especially, other guys like us, like prior military, like Justin, like, hey, we've done stuff, we've been out for a while. This is what you could do. These are your options and possibilities, let them figure it out. But at least, they have someone to talk to in regards to like getting out and what things they could do. And so she became my mentor, which was weird. And here's, this is not the best.
Why weird? Why weird?
In the Marine Corps, and this isn't the time that I was in, so I can only talk about when I was in. In the Marine Corps, when you're infantry, you're in this section of the base in Cap Lejeune where there are no females. You have no females in your chain of command. The only females you will probably see are the ones at the chow hall. That's it. And so, 4 years, 2 deployments, you're taking orders from guys, obviously, first sergeants, etc. And so it was weird for me to now have a female kind of, pretty much in charge of me, but then also someone who became like a mentor to me. And so that part was also another adjustment that, most guys, and, again, I don't know what the political landscape is now in the Marine Corps, in the Army or anywhere else, but those are things that you don't think about. That adjustment, like you have to adjust. You're going to have different people in your chain of command. You're going to have, different personalities, and it's different. It functions differently, from the actual military and the way that it's, because in the military, you can't just jump to a first sergeant and submit a complaint. You kind of have to go through your sergeant, and then obviously they go through your company commander, and then, eventually they'll go all the way up. And so when I got out, it's none of that. And the driver license, it's kind of like you have an issue, like, technically you can reach out to whoever you want. And there's nothing.
What was it, Bryan, let me ask you, what was it about her that you felt like you could trust her? Because my experience from listening to and having a lot of vets on the show is that's that trust out in the civilian world. It's a different because there's no structure and no real chain of command. What was it about her that was different that you were able to let your guard down and trust her?
So, and I'll never forget, Carol, she was very old school, and she was very, how to say, almost like disciplined, like everything, had to go a certain way. And she put her foot down in a lot of things in regards to like policies at her office level. And a lot of the customers that would come in unhappy because their license got suspended. And, she was like this thick skinned kind of person. And you know what? Here's a saying that comes to mind every time I think about her. It's rule with an iron fist and a velvet glove. That's kind of like her approach to things. It's like, this is a lady you didn't want to mess with. And so, that quickly earned my trust.
Yeah.
And aside from that, she was very direct. She did not sugarcoat things, and she was very direct. But then also she understood that I was, getting out, and I was going through that transition. Somehow she understood that. And so, that obviously won me over.
What a blessing to have. Did you have somebody like that, Justin?
Not so much. My transition was a little bit different. Ted, as you know, I spent some time contracting after the military before I went on to anything else. So that kind of made a bit of a smoother transition because it was a very military type mindset. And then even from there into law enforcement, again, similar mindset. I didn't experience the different gender roles. I wasn't combat arms when I was in the military. So I had males, females integrated throughout my career. So that didn't really hit me as hard as it hits a lot of people.
Yeah.
But as far as the transition, like I say, a lot of my positions that I moved into kind of mirrored that semi camaraderie type role. It was never the same. It was never what it was in the military. In fact, my best friends to this day, Bryan, I got out right after you did. I got out in 2010. Some of my best friends to this day are my buddies from the military.
Yeah.
That's just kind of the way it is. Even you can try. And I think that's kind of why I looked for those roles, like why I got into the positions I got into, is because I wanted that camaraderie that I had and that experience that I had. But it's never the same.
Yeah. That's what I hear. I mean, every time I hear everyone says it's just not the same. And it's interesting from somebody being on the outside in. it's such a consistent theme when you're talking to a veteran that I wish employers were better about understanding what you bring to the table and what training you have. And there's just no clear transition. There's no clear language. If you were an XYZ in the military, companies don't know how to translate that to what you could do. And then I think last week when we were talking, our guest mentioned how they just literally, there was no chain of command. So they felt like they were flailing all the time. They felt like they couldn't get anywhere because there was no structure and there was no real way to reach the person who might, which is sort of what you were talking about, Bryan. Bryan, how did you get to real estate?
So when I got out in '09, it wasn't the best real estate market, right? And so I was blessed to come across another guy who enlightened me a little bit on the VA loan. He wasn't a realtor. He wasn't, he had nothing in real estate, but he told me, he's like, listen, you should buy a house. You should buy a house. The sooner the better. And so I didn't have a job, right? I started working in 2010, and at least, I think it was before like June. I think July of 2010 is when I ended up starting at the driver license. So I had a gap between the Marine Corps, and then I had a few months, that I didn't have any income aside from BH, which doesn't count towards the purchase of a house. And so he told me, hey, you should buy a house. And I ended up buying a house later that year. I ended up not finding a loophole, but I ended up getting an exception on the income side. And so I ended up purchasing a house, $145,000 house. It's a 4.2. It was like 1,900 square feet. And it was right behind UCF. At that time, obviously, the market was different. But anyways, I then realized that real estate is something that I could do. I could see myself doing. But then again, it wasn't the right, environment. Like it's just the market sucked then. And so I was like, you know what? I'll worry about that later and I'll revisit it. So I think that's when the seed was planted, at least for me, going through that. And here's something else. When I was looking for a realtor, my main thing was, are they knowledgeable in the VA loan? And I kid you not, I called about 20. Out of the 20, maybe 15 answered. And out of the 15, maybe only 2 kind of knew the VA loan process. And from those 2, I ended up going with one who I'm still friends with, by the way. And, just his approach to the entire process, kind of like, it planted that seed. I was like, I could see myself doing this. I was really, really intrigued by the entire process. And anyways, so that's kind of how it got planted in my head. Eventually, in 2014 is when I got licensed. I waited obviously because just the market is just different. And at that point, I already had completed my undergrad, and that became my priority. So then I was like, all right, I complete my undergrad. I'm getting close to finishing or starting my master's. It'll be done in 2 years. Now is the time for me to get licensed, and now is the time for me to go in. Obviously, I had money saved by then, a few things which allowed me to start real estate, because even in 2014, the market was low. Most of the average sales price was like literally like $180,000, $190,000. So, and it was slow. It was one of those slow markets. And so I ended up, getting licensed. And then from there, just, I had things in place. I did it kind of almost in the smart way. And that's how I got into real estate. And
why do you think, I want to ask this to both of you because I was thinking about what you said. Why do you think realtors are uninformed? And it's not just uninformed. I feel like many are not accepting of a VA loan. I see it on the other end because we will submit a VA pre-approval, and I usually have to call the listing agent, and you can tell almost immediately when the listing agent would not want a VA loan, and I have to educate them. And I think it's almost like the first time they've heard that. Why is it? Because both of you are realtors now. So why do you think that is, that the VA loan still has such a weird stigma to it?
I think part of that, I think part of it actually is a lot of realtors on the listing side. They're afraid of the VA appraisal and what's going to come from that. So that, in what I've seen, of course, I am close to Tampa, so we have a lot of, we have MacDill, we have a lot of veterans. So they are very common out my way. But I have had some pushback, and I've actually had I've had to call listing agents and say, hey, I see you're accepting FHA loans. Can we talk about a VA loan? And actually had to educate agents on what that means. And I'm talking agents that have been agents for 15, 20 years. And, I've had my license for about 3 years.
Wow. Bryan, how about you?
So I find myself, coming across a lot of realtors that don't understand it. I find myself having to explain it, especially, if you're trying to submit an offer. But ultimately, I think it comes down to, obviously, a VA loan. Well, at least now it's more popular. Like 6, 7 years ago, it wasn't as popular. And so a lot of agents just don't do enough transactions, with VA loans, VA purchases to fully understand it. And the other component to that is they think because it's a zero, down payment loan that person doesn't have money. And it's like, listen, they probably have retirement, disability, fixed income in addition to their regular job income. This is a solid loan. Ultimately, at the end of the day, the government's basically your cosigner if you want to look at it that way.
Basically, right?
Yeah. And, but most agents don't understand that. And I find myself having to explain that as well. And it's frustrating. Especially during right after COVID, when the entire, market just, it was crazy submitting offers. Like, if you had a VA loan, I had to tell them, like, listen, your chances of winning anything are going to be extremely low unless you go extremely over the list price. And that's just what it is. No agent wanted it, or at least listing agents that I came across did not want to hear like it's a VA loan. It's like,
well, they still put it. They put it on. I've seen it on. I don't know if they can still do it, but I've seen it on MLS when won't accept VA, which I didn't even think was a legal, legit thing they could do. But I guess they can say the loans that they don't want. I just think we need to do a better job, my industry and your industry, at educating the realtors that a VA loan is beautiful. And I understand the appraisal part, but in reality, at the end of the day, the loan is so solid. It's a matter of understanding it and educating people. All right. As we wrap up, I'd love for you to give a piece of advice, Bryan. Last question. If you had something that you could tell somebody transitioning out, the first thing or the second thing that they need to do in order to make the transition out of military service into civilian life smoother, what would you have them do? What would you say?
Two big things. Number one, as I mentioned before, find a mentor. Find a mentor. And most likely that mentor is going to be probably military, so they could understand obviously your scenario. But find a mentor early. Don't wait 3 months until you get out. At least start a year out. Start planning that. And the second thing is, most of us say, oh, when I get out, I'm going to go work. Great. Yes. Obviously, 99% of us are going to go work. But for you to be more specific, when I get out, okay, your whole objective is to get that letter from that employer accepting you prior to you getting out. But no specific, let's say that's not the scenario, you don't get that, but at least you know exactly what you're going to go do. And you have to be very specific, not just say, I'm going to get a job in the healthcare industry. Be more specific, because I think most of us just have that kind of like, I'm going to get out, get a job. Great. Yes. But you have to have that detailed idea of what you're going to do. So those two major things, obviously the mentor, and then also be very, very super specific on how you're going to execute that plan getting out. So
love it. All right, Justin, what's the best way they can find you?
So my website's scrolling across the bottom there. That's my real estate website for my team. And then I've also got an Instagram that I use personally. It's jking_adventures.
Awesome. And Bryan, how can they reach you? What's the best if they want to ask you a question, or somebody might want to pick your brain?
The best thing is you could call me. That's just, call me 321-695-9168, 321-695-9168. I don't care, what your question is. If you're pondering a certain industry on getting out, I could absolutely and I'll be more than willing to talk to you. And I have a master's in business. So with that being said, any industry you want to get out and put up a business, hey, I'm your guy. I don't care. I'll share as much as I could. I'm not going to charge anything. It's just call me. That's just the simplest way.
Wonderful. All right, Bryan, thank you so much for being on today. Justin, always a pleasure to spend time with you, my friend. Thank you both for your service. I mean that from the heart. If you have a veteran or first responder or somebody you consider a hero that falls into similar categories, please reach out to me or to Justin. We'd love to spotlight you on the show, and we'd love to get your insights on how you transitioned out of whatever you were doing into whatever you're doing. Thank you both so much. We'll see you guys next week. Bye, everybody.